Reviving the economy in 2020. Two difficult decisions: to reopen or not to reopen. These are some of the choices that President Uhuru Kenyatta was faced with. He came under immense pressure, and for the last 2 months, he's been asking himself, do I reopen and revive the economy and run the risk of an escalation of the infections, or do we let the country remain closed, run down the economy, and minimize infection rates? On the 6th of July, herd immunity came to play. The president reopened for the sake of the economy, with your own health becoming your official responsibility. This week on Metropole Debrief, we take a look at 6 months into 2020 with coronavirus and forecast what the other half of the year looks like and what the economy will look like after reopening, but amid COVID-19. Hello there and welcome to the show. My name is Ndero Oganga. On the 6th of April, President Uhuru Kenyatta ordered a cessation of movement in and out of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kwale, and Kilifi counties in an effort to contain the spread of COVID-19 virus. That measure was later relaxed on Kwale and Kilifi counties, leaving Nairobi, Mombasa, and Mandera counties under a partial lockdown. But now, President Kenyatta has opted to lift the ban on movement in and out of the three counties starting 4 a.m. on Tuesday.
Today I order and direct that the cessation of movement into and out of the Nairobi metropolitan area, Mombasa County, and Mandera County that is currently in force shall lapse today or at 4 a.m. tomorrow, Tuesday, the 7th of July, 2020. Number two, I do order and direct that the nationwide curfew that is currently in force between the hours of 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. daily be and is hereby extended for a further 30 days.
In a bid to reopen and revive Kenya's already ailing economy, President Kenyatta has equally given the air transport industry the green light to resume flights, albeit under strict guidelines.
Local air travel within the territory of the Republic of Kenya shall resume effective Wednesday, the 15th of July, 2020, and again, in strict conformity with all applicable guidelines and protocols from both the Ministry of Health and our civil aviation authorities. Number 7, that international air travel into and out of the territory of the Republic of Kenya shall resume effective the 1st of August, 2020, once again, in strict conformity with all protocols from the Ministry of Health, local, as well as international civil aviation authorities, and any additional requirements applicable at the ports of departure, arrival, or transit.
Equally, there have been unending calls by Kenyans to reopen places of worship. With the advice of the National Security Council and National Emergency Response Committee, President Kenyatta has ordered a phased reopening of places of worship under strict conformity with protocols developed by the Interfaith Council.
Only a maximum of 100 participants will be allowed at each worship ceremony, which should not take more than an hour. That Sunday schools and madrasas shall continue to remain suspended until further notice, and in-person worship shall not include congregants under the age of 13 or above the age of 58 and shall neither include persons with underlying health conditions.
As for the reopening of schools, President Kenyatta said the Ministry of Education will by Tuesday announce the 2020 academic calendar for basic education and tertiary institutions. While President Kenyatta acknowledged the need to reopen and revive the Kenyan economy, the president has in the same breath indicated that should COVID-19 cases increase, the government will not hesitate to undertake a total lockdown.
The order to reopen is given conditionally. Should the situation deteriorate and pose a challenge to our health infrastructure, we will have to revert back to lockdown. In the next 21 days, we shall study patterns of interactions and the spread of the disease. Any trends that signal a worsening of the pandemic, we will have no choice but to return to lockdown at zero option.
But even as a phased reopening of the country gets underway, President Kenyatta maintains that the ban on social and political gatherings of any form will remain in place for another 30 days. Equally, the restriction on bars to take away services and restriction to the number of people who can attend weddings and funerals have equally been extended for 30 days. This is in a bid to strike a delicate balance between reopening the economy and containing the spread of COVID-19 virus across the country. For Metropole TV, I'm Ondero Oganga. Let's briefly take a look at some of the sectors that the president has reopened. Now, on the 22nd of March, the government, through the Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe, announced that it will be suspending all international flights in and out of Kenya effective midnight on Wednesday, 25th of March. Now remember, this just came ahead of the government receiving a lot of fire because there was a plane from China that landed in the country and another from Italy that the government had no idea on when Mutahi Kagwe was appearing before the National Assembly, and hence they came under a lot of pressure and decided that on the 25th of March they were going to suspend all flights. Furthermore, on the 6th of April, President Uhuru Kenyatta ordered cessation of movement in and out of Nairobi and Mombasa, bringing domestic flights to a sudden halt. Now, according to a latest report by African Airlines Association, Africa's aviation industry recorded a 90.3% year-on-year passenger traffic reduction for the month of May. As a result, the industry will suffer an estimated revenue loss of 8.103 billion. That's about 810 trillion this year due to COVID-19 pandemic. The impact assessment analysis shows passenger revenue dropped to 40.3 trillion Kenya shillings in the first quarter of 2020, which represents 13.8% year over year, with more impact seen in quarter two of this year. Now remember, quarter two is when we've seen the disease getting more and more serious. April, May, June. We've seen the disease spreading across the world, many countries reporting cases, the cases of death going high, and even countries that were beginning to reopen going back on lockdown. Now costing 274 trillion Kenya shillings. This is how much that was lost in the second quarter of this year. Now, it doesn't stop there. In March, Jambojet, the budget carrier and a subsidiary of KQ, suspended its flight to Kigali and Entebbe, citing a reduction of travelers on its international routes. Now remember, by March, coronavirus had spread across a better part of Europe, the Americas, and it was also in Africa. So we don't have tourists coming into Africa, and Africans are also not traveling across the continent. CEO Alan Kilavuka said that Kenya Airways had lost an estimated 1 billion shillings in revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic and related lockdowns. Now, after the reopening, Kenya becomes the latest East African country to announce a resumption of air travel after Rwanda said that its airport would reopen for a scheduled commercial flight operations at the start of August. So countries are looking at the possibility of reviving aviation. Many sectors are tied to aviation. For example, business, tourism, those who are traveling either for official duties or for leisure duties. Goods have to move in and out, and if goods have to move, people have to move. If Kenya Airways, if Kenya Airways, for example, has lost 1 billion shillings, and Jambojet, which is its subsidiary, had to cancel flights in Kigali and Entebbe. And remember, Jambojet is just, would say, a local and regional carrier. It doesn't do a lot of continental and international travel. Then they're hemorrhaging a lot of money, and this will definitely affect their staff. And we'll look at that briefly, but now let's take a look at the labor market and how business has been affected in the last 6 months. Kenya had a labor force of about 75% participation rate. Now this rate fell to 56.8% in April of 2020. According to a survey by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, the percentage of the population in active employment, whether informal or formal, has fallen to 65.3% of men and 48.8% of women. What does all these statistics mean? It means that at least 1 million Kenyans have lost their jobs or have been put on indefinite unpaid leave as the COVID-19 morphs into a major job crisis. What are some of the sectors that have been affected and the people who've been affected? The Chinese contractors that are building the standard gauge railways sent 4,013 Kenyans and 471 Chinese experts on unpaid leave due to the coronavirus pandemic in the country. This is SGR also reeling from the effects of coronavirus, because remember, if people are not going to the coast, then SGR has no business, because even when they said cargo should be 100% transported through the SGR, at least to revive its business, Kenyans refuse, particularly those who live at the coast and truck drivers. So SGR is also hanging in the wind like all other sectors. Now, aviation. At the Kenya Airways, there's a thick cloud of helplessness as its more than 4,000 employees wait for a government bailout and the lifting of travel restrictions. The pay of a majority of its staff was cut by 75%. So this is a company that has lost over 1 billion Kenya shillings. Jambojet is not flying, and they're waiting for government bailout. So it means that people have to take a pay cut, and sometimes when it's 10%, 20, 30, at most 50, some of their employees have to contend with a 75% pay cut. Let's take a look at the agricultural sector. The horticultural sector was also doing fairly well and employed over 150,000 Kenyans directly and another 500,000 indirectly. However, a majority of those jobs have been on the line. For a long time, we saw footage of flowers being discarded because the flower markets in the Netherlands had closed. Our biggest market for flowers is the Europeans and the Americas, and they're also struggling from COVID-19. Remember, flowers, leisure. We associate flowers with leisure. And because people are struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic, if it's not meant for pesticides, leisure is out. And hence, flower farmers and flower workers have been feeling the heat, particularly in Naivasha, and those who 100% depend on this. Now, according to the Alcohol Beverages Association of Kenya, BAS previously employed over 250,000 people, many of them on a daily wage. So you work, we pay you today. The association's chairman said closing them has jeopardized their support for over 2 million livelihoods. Moreover, there's uncertainty about when most workers will be able to return to their jobs. About 91.2% of workers who reported absent from work during the period of the survey are not sure when they will return to work, while 8.9% expect to return to the return to their works to be delayed between 1 and 6 months. And this makes a lot of sense because, for example, those in the hospitality industry, you do not know when tourism will resume, you do not know when bars will be reopened, casinos will be reopened, and this is tied to when do we get a vaccine, when do the recovery rates improve. So it's a state of uncertainty for businesses. Now, we've looked at aviation and business, but how does the economy look like? GDP growth in Kenya is expected to contract significantly, with the Central Bank of Kenya revising its estimate for 2020 from the initial 6.2% to 3.4%. McKinsey and company have placed growth expectations for Kenya at 1.9%. Now, in a recent report analyzing the impact of the virus in Africa, that is where they put these numbers out. The latest World Bank Kenya Economic Update predicts growth of 1.5% in 2020. Now that is lower than McKinsey's, which is at 1.9. World Bank says 1.5. and the baseline scenarios with a potential downside of a contraction of up to 1% if COVID-19 related disruptions in the economic activity last longer than they have. Last longer means the third quarter and the fourth quarter of the year. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because Treasury Cabinet Secretary Kuria Tani maintains that our growth projections will remain at 2.5%. Okay, now Kenya's medium-term growth is projected to rebound to 5.6% over the medium term on the assumption that investor confidence will be restored as soon as COVID-19 pandemic is contained. Question about that assumption is when. However, residual risk include potential for a drought and the second round of locust invasion in mid-2020, which could reduce agricultural output and hurt rural economies. The shilling is managing within the 10% range to the dollar, up to $1 for 110 shillings, and is expected to fluctuate between 104 to 108 shillings for a dollar. This is due to decreased horticultural, floriculture exports, no tourism or hospitality receipts, and suspected decrease in diaspora remittances later on in the year, as Kenyans abroad are trying to mitigate their own situation in the declining economies across the world. Also, the real impact of COVID-19 on manufacturing is expected to be seen later on in the year, and that's the next quarter, when households and businesses spending is likely to drop by about 50%, because people will have to start weighing what's needed and what's wanted. That is the state of the economy. That's how we look like 6 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. We have reopened. Good thing, bad thing, that's up for debate. But what do the next 6 months look like, having reopened, but in the wake of COVID-19? What do we need to do to jumpstart this economy and put it back on its feet? McKinsey 1.9, World Bank 1.5, and 2.5 is the best that Treasury will give us. Is it good enough from projections of 5.6 up to 8%? After the break, we speak to Kwame Owino, the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, to contextualize what a phased reopening amid COVID-19 means for the country. See you shortly.